Hey, wake up. It's Means Morning News. Just after 11 a.m. on the East Coast, I'm Sam Sachs. It's the Friday show. And here are today's stories as I found them, sketched on an acorn dug up by a squirrel. Very, very tiny writing. And we begin at the White House, where President Trump said he would not seek permission from Congress for military strikes on boats in Latin America, and he promised that the extrajudicial killings would continue.
If you are declaring war against these cartels and Congress is likely to approve of that process, why not just ask for a declaration of war?
Well, I don't think we're going to necessarily ask for a declaration of war. I think we're just going to kill people that are bringing drugs into our country. Okay? We're going to kill them. You know, they're going to be like dead. Okay? Yeah.
Mr. President.
Yes, red hair.
Thank you.
Beautiful red hair.
Thank you.
They're going to be like dead. Now, let's hear from the beautiful redhead over there. I know all U.S. presidents are psychopaths to a certain degree, but we really broke the mold with this one, though. Of course, there were 2 survivors recently of these illegal boat strikes who turned out not to be traffickers at all. War Secretary Pete Hegseth tried to explain what happened there.
To those 2 that survived the shot on the semi-submersible, think again, compared to Iraq and Afghanistan, the vast majority of people that we captured on the battlefield, we handed over to the home country. Did we always like how it shaped out? Sometimes we did, sometimes we did not. But 99% would go to the Afghan authorities or the Iraqi authorities. So in this case, those 2, they were treated by American medics and handed immediately over to their countries where they came from, hopefully to face prosecution, which is a very standard way of handling something like this.
Except they didn't face prosecution because they were innocent. They weren't drug traffickers. And so far, that's the only evidence anyone has on the nature of these targets. The Pentagon hasn't released a shred of evidence on the people who were killed or what was on these boats. All we know is that the only 2 survivors weren't who the administration claimed they were. On Thursday, the Pentagon threatened Venezuela with a show of military force. It sent a pair of heavy B-1 bombers to fly up the coast to simulate an attack as part of some training mission. The military conducted a similar exercise with heavy bombers against Venezuela last week, too. During Thursday's White House meeting, Trump said he wasn't happy with Venezuela, nor was he happy with a lot of other countries in the region, like Colombia and Mexico, which he claimed were run by drug cartels.
Because those cartels are running those countries, okay? And that includes Colombia. Colombia is a drug den. It's a drug den, and it has been for a long time. You got a lousy leader over there right now, bad guy, a thug. But they make cocaine at levels that we've never seen before. And they sell it back into this, and they're not going to get away with it much longer. We're not going to put up with it much longer. Colombia is very bad. Mexico is run by the cartels, and we have to defend ourselves from that.
Actually, Mexico is run by a very popular president who is doing cool things like creating state-owned chocolate and coffee enterprises, which honestly is more of a threat to the U.S. ruling class than any cartels. Meanwhile, with the White House distracted blowing up fishing boats, the Gaza ceasefire that it's supposed to be a guarantor of is crumbling. There are reports of more Israeli military attacks on Palestinians across the enclave, and Israel is still not allowing the requisite amount of aid trucks into Gaza. And there are also reports of Israelis being allowed to riot and block aid trucks from entering Gaza. Turkey's President Erdogan, who also signed the ceasefire agreement earlier this month, said the U.S. needs to do more to protect the deal. He told reporters, quote, "As Turkey, we are doing our utmost for the ceasefire to be secured. The Hamas side is abiding by the ceasefire. In fact, it is openly stating its commitment to this. Israel, meanwhile, is continuing to violate the ceasefire. The international community, namely the United States, must do more to ensure Israel's full compliance to the ceasefire and agreement. Israel must be forced to keep its promises via sanctions and halting of arms sales." I can understand the Turkish president's concerns here, but someone should notify him that the US president has moved on to other priorities, like wars of regime change in Latin America and building a big fucking ballroom attached to the White House. All right, now to the growing problem of hunger in the United States. The government shutdown is making it worse. A warning went out this week that food assistance programs like SNAP and WIC are about to lapse. Nearly 50 million Americans rely on those programs. SNAP was already leveled by cuts of hundreds of billions of dollars in the most recent Republican budget bill. And earlier this month, a report from ProPublica documented how food banks across the U.S. are also struggling under the Trump administration's spending cuts. The president ordered his cabinet secretaries to freeze all spending on programs he deemed to be DEI or too woke. This was an illegal order since these programs were to be fully funded by law based on appropriations from Congress. But we're learning that when one party controls the White House, Congress, and the Supreme Court, turns out there are no checks and balances. So now we're all living with the consequences of this. Among the cuts was $500 million for the Emergency Food Assistance Program, which purchases surplus food from U.S. farmers and distributes it to food banks and charities. $500 million was about a quarter of the program's budget, and the effects of the cut were immediate. ProPublica reviewed Department of Agriculture data and found more than 4,300 canceled food deliveries as a result of the cut. Every state, along with Washington, D.C. and Puerto Rico, felt an impact. In total, more than 90 million pounds of food that organizations relied on to feed people in need was never delivered due to the cuts. For example, the Food Bank of Central Louisiana relied on the program to serve areas of the state that have the highest poverty rates in the nation. This is from ProPublica, quote, "The Trump administration canceled 10 orders for the food bank, totaling over $400,000 of pork, chicken, cheese, dried cranberries, dried plums, milk, and eggs," records show. The food bank has struggled to keep up with demand following the cut and a decrease in private donations. Staff told ProPublica they used to distribute 25-pound packages of food, but over the summer, some packages shrank to about half of that weight. So the poorest people in the country are getting less food right now because the White House cut $500 million from a critical assistance program for no legitimate reason. The same White House that is giving 80 times that amount, $40 billion, to bail out Argentina so that Trump's friend Javier Milei isn't thrown out of office for crashing that country's economy. Hunger in the U.S. is increasing and is higher right now than at any point since the Great Recession. An estimated 18 million households reported food insecurity in 2023, and that included 7 million kids. So it's probably a bad idea to start cutting food en route to charities and food banks. If the White House has a plan, it will simply deny that hunger exists. Last month, the USDA announced it was terminating a food insecurity survey that had existed since the 1990s. In a press release, the department claimed the survey, quote, failed to present anything more than subjective, liberal fodder. Is it bad for a government to starve its people? Nah, that's just some woke liberal nonsense. And finally, Elon Musk's space company is on the verge of humiliation. The US government announced this week it's in the process of reopening the contract to land astronauts on the moon as part of the Artemis 3 mission. Acting NASA Administrator Sean Duffy criticized Musk's company, which currently holds that contract, for falling behind schedule. He said during an interview with CNBC, quote, "I love SpaceX. It's an amazing company. The problem is they're behind. They've pushed their timelines out, and we're in a race against China. The president and I want to get to the moon in this president's term, so I'm going to open up the contract." Musk responded to Duffy's announcement by posting on Twitter, "Sean Dummy." Fair play. SpaceX secured the $3 billion contract to build the lunar lander to ferry astronauts to the moon's surface. That requires the company's Starship rocket to be fully operational. But after 11 test flights, the vessel has blown up more times than it's hit its marks. Artemis 3 was originally scheduled for late 2024, but in part because of SpaceX's delays, it's been pushed back multiple times and is now barely clinging on to a 2027 launch date. NASA already has a backup lander contract with another billionaire who was bored and started a space company. That's Jeff Bezos' Blue Origin, but that company is also behind schedule. The one thing that might save Musk is that it's likely no other company has even the capability to get a moon lander project flying on NASA's new expedited timeline. So, the space agency is likely stuck with SpaceX. While losing the contract would be humiliating for Musk, his company would still walk away with $3 billion from the US government for nothing. Anyway, NASA Chief Sean Duffy is obviously under a lot of pressure here. That's in addition to the collapsing commercial air industry he's facing as head of the Transportation Department. But Donald Trump desperately wants a legacy project completed before he croaks. And overseeing a new moon landing is, for him, right up there with winning the Nobel Peace Prize. In addition to pressure from the president, the foreign policy blob in the US has framed the return to the moon as a race against China. And surely Duffy doesn't want to be the guy who loses that race, especially with the head start the US has, having been to the moon before and all. But everyone here at MMN is hoping Duffy is just the right guy to blow this. If you're wondering why we're Team China here, it's because the US already announced plans to violate the Outer Space Treaty by putting missiles in orbit. It's going to try to put missiles on the moon too. Can't let that happen. All right, time for this week's main event. Let's check out those rich dick nominations on Blue Sky. We've got White House Budget Director Russell Vought, who has been on a warpath to make every government worker's life hell ever since his wife left him. Next up, Andrew Cuomo, who has some sort of humiliation kink, which is why he refuses to drop out of the New York City mayoral race. He is staying in, though, because the billionaires think he's their best bet to beat Democratic Socialist Zohran Mamdani. But I think Curtis Sliwa summed up Cuomo's record best during one of the recent debates when he said, "Cuomo's slapping fannies and killing grannies." Go to hell, Andrew. Trump was nominated, as he should be every week, whether it's the shakedown of the public treasury or all the extrajudicial killings in Latin America. This guy is a rampaging dick. And finally, Speaker of the House Mike Johnson's nominated, Mr. Government Shutdown, who won't even call the House back into session to negotiate over a new spending bill. His party has triggered a healthcare crisis with Medicaid cuts, and he's also delaying swearing in Congresswoman-elect Adelita Grijalva in order to keep the Epstein files hidden so as not to embarrass his boss in the White House, Donald Trump. pretty scummy. All very strong nominations. Thank you, everyone. But in the end, this week's Rich Dick is Palmer Luckey. Yes, that's his real name. Luckey first gained prominence as the teenage inventor of the Oculus Rift virtual reality system, which was purchased by Facebook for a couple $2 billion. Most of us would have cashed out after that and pursued hobbies or whatever, but Luckey leveraged that fortune to do evil shit, like donate to Donald Trump and start a defense company. Yeah, he became a war profiteer. His firm, Anduril Industries, named after a sword in Lord of the Rings, specializes in producing AI-powered weapons and surveillance systems for the Pentagon. And during a recent interview with Joe Rogan, Luckey explained the guiding principle at his company is preparing for a war with China. It's called China 27, and Luckey described it, quote, "The idea is that anything we are working on, anything we are investing in, needs to be built with the assumption that sometime in 2027, China is going to move on Taiwan." Do you know something we don't, Palmer? He doesn't. He just wants to make sure his company is in a prime position to profit off a war in case it breaks out, not be distracted working on other stuff. Of course, if you're orienting your company to prepare for a war with China, and soon, you're incentivized to agitate for war with China. Luckey himself traveled to Taiwan in August to personally deliver a new weaponized drone system called Altius. He was quoted in a press release saying, "We produced Altius at risk because Taiwan needs defense capabilities now, not years from now. Anduril is committed to supporting Taiwan and our allies across the Indo-Pacific with the technology they need to deter aggression and preserve stability." A Chinese government official actually criticized Luckey's comments on the Rogan show. Here's how the Global Times reported it. Quote, "Asked to comment on such claims on Wednesday, a spokesperson for the State Council Taiwan Affairs Office said that Taiwan is China's Taiwan, and China will never allow the Democratic Progressive Party authorities to collude with external forces and turn the island into a hell." Okay then, who the fuck elected Palmer Luckey? Really, he's a billionaire nerd, but since we didn't tax him sufficiently, he's able to amass enough power to provoke World War III? That doesn't seem right. The Chinese shouldn't be too concerned though, because Luckey also has a side project to crash the US economy. He and a group of other tech billionaires just got approval to start their own bank. Yeah, Luckey and Palantir bros Peter Thiel and Joe Lonsdale are behind the new digital bank called Erebor, which is also named after something in Lord of the Rings. Honestly, cloaking your evil doing in whimsical fantasy novel trappings makes it all even worse. They got approval for the bank despite being open about how they want to emulate Silicon Valley Bank, or SVB, which failed spectacularly in 2023. It was the largest bank collapse since 2008. This is from the Financial Times. Quote, "Luckey and Lonsdale, who were big donors to Donald Trump in the 2024 US presidential election, want the bank to take over the niche once occupied by SVB as the go-to lender for riskier companies and cryptocurrency players that traditional banks might reject. Its target market would be businesses that were part of the US innovation economy, in particular tech companies focused on virtual currencies, artificial intelligence, defense, and manufacturing. It would also serve individuals who work for or invest in these companies." Hey, what could go wrong? Lending exclusively to industries that are inflating the biggest financial bubbles of all time. Luckey's aware of the risk here. He's also aware that he can make boatloads of money tapping into these bubbles right now, and when they do eventually pop, he won't be left holding the bag, as we saw with SVB's collapse and the collapse of the mega banks in 2008. The rich and well-connected always get bailed out. I could go on and on about Mr. Lucky here. He also has some loathsome social views. But I think being a war profiteer and a crypto bankster are sufficient to make the case for now. We'll be seeing a lot more of him in the future. Palmer Luckey. He's this week's Rich Dick. Okay, friends, the show ends today with a sunrise from Oregon. It was sent in by the Lopez family in Oceanside. Enjoy. Thanks to the Lopez family. That's the show. Thanks for watching, and thanks to the team behind the scenes. Find more MMN at means.tv. We also have YouTube and podcast channels, and you can find us on Twitter, Instagram, and Blue Sky. One day capitalism will fall. Until then, we'll be right here. See you next week.